You're listening to the Australian Hunting and Beyond podcast with Matt, where we talk about hunting, shooting, fishing, camping, and everything else that the great outdoors has to offer. Let's get into it. The weather is warming up, and I know when it comes towards summer, it is a time where I like to put down the rifle a little bit, mainly because the state forests tend to get some total fire bans and you can't hunt. But I do love getting out there and chasing some fish, whether it be fresh or salt water. So I thought, what better way than get somebody on who's got a fair bit of experience, and we'll talk about how we linked up. But I'd like to welcome to the show Damon Sheriff from Tasmanian Fishing Artistry.
Lovely to be here, mate.
Mate, really excited that you've been able to join us. And I've spoken to some taxidermists for deer and goats and things like that. But you're on the other side of the spectrum, and I'm really curious as to how this whole thing works with fish, because that's your bread and butter. And just to explain how we sort of linked up was I saw this monster brown trout that was caught down in Tasmania. I think it was 39 pounds off the top of my head.
Yep, it was huge.
And I believe you are the taxidermist who is dealing with that monster.
Yes.
And that's how we got chatting. And so I thought, what a perfect opportunity. Mate, talk me through how you do everything, because it looks phenomenal. I will say that, and I've seen your Facebook and whatnot, where it shocks me if this is true. You paint individual scales.
Yes.
All right, talk me through all this.
Rightio. I'll start off what I do. The angler obviously catches the fish and brings it to me, and I normally put it in the freezer until it's time to do it, and I get it out of the freezer. And then what I do is I take a heap of measurements of the fish, across the fish, lengthways, the gills to the end of the body. I also measure where the fins go on the fish. And basically what I do is carve a foam body to fit inside the fish. So I make a body with the measurements I've got on a piece of paper. I measure the fish with a pair of calipers, and the body's made out of foam, and that's the first thing I do. The next thing I do is create the head, and most taxidermists with trout don't actually use the real head anymore, because what happens over time is they don't last, they shrivel up, and they hold a lot of oil, and they tend to leak the oil, and it just makes a mess of them, so they don't last. So I actually make a silicone cast of the actual fish's real head and basically fill that with fiberglass, so I get a replica of the head that comes out of the mould. And the other procedure, what I do is skin the fish. So I run an incision along the backside of the fish, or if the customer wants two sides showing, I run the incision along the top of the fish. So I basically hide it, that if they want both sides showing. And I do that with putty, but on the back side of the fish is a wall mount, so the fish would be actually mounted up on the wall. And after that, it's a drying process, which normally takes about probably about 12 days if the weather's all right. So we're just waiting for all the moisture to get out of the skin. And I normally do that indoors, so near the fire, around a nice warm room. And then I start my artwork on the fish, and you're exactly right what you said. I actually individually paint every scale. So sometimes, a complete trout has around about 3,000 scales.
Wow.
So I actually paint 3,000 scales by hand. And it comes out, it's a big, big effort, but it comes out so much better than just an airbrushed fish. And and then I apply the top coat, which is a varnish, normally a 2-pack epoxy varnish I use. And if the fish is actually it has two show sides, I actually put the fish on a rotisserie like a fishing lure, and that because it's quite slow drying the epoxy, and that gives it a really nice, smooth sort of round finish around the fish. So you get no lumps or anything like that. And after that, I normally work on the habitat. So whether the person wants a board, or some people like their fish mounted on driftwood, or some rocks, some artificial rocks with some reeds over the back, or it really depends on the person of how they want to display them. And I give the angler all that option to choose all that. So yeah, there's quite a bit to it.
So there's a lot of similarities between what you do and what someone does with, say, a deer.
Yeah.
So, which slightly shocks me a little bit because I just think how fragile fish skin can be, and how what's the word? It's probably how thin, and
Mm.
it just feels like a really slight membrane as opposed to like an animal's skin and like hair. It just it fascinates me. How do you put? I know with deer they stitch it together. Can you do that with the fish skin? Like I'd be thinking like a small needle would almost, make a big hole because it's such a thin membrane.
Yeah, well, some of the trout species are actually worse than others. Things like tiger trout, brook trout, they actually have quite thicker skin, and they're a lot easier to work with. But probably the worst type of trout of them all is rainbow trout, and they have extremely thin skin, and their scales are very easily, they come off very easily. So you have to take extreme care with them. I do use a tanning solution, which a homemade one, which I make up. It's sort of like a pickle, and I put this on sometimes if the fish is like very touchy, if it has a tendency of popping scales, I'll actually tan the skin in an esky before I actually work on the fish. And what this does is just toughen the scales up slightly, and then I work on the fish, and then I give it a really good go in the tanning solution. But rainbows are an absolute nightmare to work on, and the more silver they are, normally the easier the scales come off them. So the silverfish tend to be the worst ones.
It's super super interesting, and I've just got so many questions for it. How long does it take? Like you were saying that 3,000 scales to individually paint. How long does that take you?
Yeah, I'm not a really fast painter. I must admit, I do things pretty slowly. But the last fish I did was a 12 pound sea trout caught out of the Tamar River near Launceston, which is in northern Tasmania, and it was a beautiful fish, but very silver fish. And basically, I had to paint more or less every scale on the fish, and it took me about 2 days to finish the paint job. So it probably took me 15 hours, 15 to 18 hours, somewhere there. And that's not including the clear of the fish. So, really, it's very hard to add up the hours you do spend on them, because you're always waiting for something to dry. And it does draw it out for, it can take well over a month to finish a fish normally. But the actual work time is probably around, more close to around about 1.5 to 2 weeks on a decent size one. But because you've got all that drying time, a lot of people have two fish on the go, so they've always got a job to do. But yeah, rainbows and silverfish are definitely the ones you sort of got to be a little bit more careful with, because they do tend to have very, very fine skin, and their scales can pop very easily, and it's quite hard to hide missing scales on a fish skin. I know some people have actually scaled the whole fish I haven't done it myself, but I have a few taxidermy friends, and they've actually scaled the whole fish and done away with the scales. But it just doesn't look quite right to me. But I like to have the scales on the fish.
All right, so let's get to that trout because I'm by no means an expert chasing trout. I'm really only just getting into it. I've grown up and it's probably spent 40% of my, up to about 18, 19 down the south coast of New South Wales chasing saltwater fish.
Yep.
Now I'm really focusing a bit more on the freshwater stuff. For me, looking at this thing going, man, 39 pounds, that's just, it's enormous. So firstly, congratulations to Ashley out there who was the angler. Well done. That's like, what a stonker. It's enormous. Does it make you nervous when you are like working with that? Because, potentially it's like the heaviest trout or brown trout that someone's got in Australia. Does it make you nervous, like playing around with it? You don't want to lose a couple of scales? Like, it freaks me out.
Freaks me out. It really does. Like, there's always, you're working on someone's pride and joy, and there's always in the back of your mind, you could stuff it up. You could actually run the scalpel or the fleshing tool through the skin and wreck someone's fish of a lifetime. But you just, I suppose, you get better and better the more you do it, and it becomes less on your mind, I suppose. With a really big fish, the last one or the one I'm actually just finishing off now, is a 20-pound trout from the Pieman River on the west coast of Tasmania, and I'm doing it for a young fella, and he caught it on his second fishing trip, and it's one of the biggest sea trout or sea running brown trout ever caught in the Pieman, and I was quite nervous skinning that. It really took a lot of time to skin it, and I wanted to do a really good job for him. So I was being extra careful because I know those fish don't come around every day of the week. They're quite a rarity, and I'd hate to muck one up on someone like that.
Yeah, I look at it and go, man, there's some crazy sort of fish that you've been able to do. I believe you did a big snapper for your son, like a 90 centimeter snapper. That was a decent fish as well. Does that hit home a bit more because it's for your son?
Well, last snapper I did, it's actually been work in progress for about 12 years. So it's sort of, I've got quite a few work in progress fish, and they always get put at the back of the line because I'm always working on other people's fish to make an income. So my fish and my son's fish tend to get sort of put aside. So they can take a number of years for us to get to them. But yeah, Benjamin, my eldest son, caught that snapper out of the River in northern Tasmania as well, and it was his biggest snapper, and he caught it. He's 24 now, so he must have been about 12, I reckon, when he caught it. And I finally got it finished this year for his birthday, so he was pretty stoked with that.
It's not a bad effort for what'd you say, 12-year-old to catch one like
12
that. Happy days. I've been chasing some snapper and I'm not up to that size yet. It was quite an impressive fish.
Yes, we're pretty lucky down here. We get some really, really big snapper. I live at Bridport, which is in the state's northeast. I used to live in the Tamar River, and I've moved here about 8 years ago, and I mainly target snapper, and I've caught them up to 11.6 kilos down here. So, there's some really, really big snapper in Tassie.
Having a look at all the different stuff, and you were sharing some of your fellow taxidermist mates' posts and looking at the lobster and the crabs and things like that. That's super impressive too. How does that work? Because do you dabble in that or just tend to stay with the fish side of things? But then because they're a crustacean, is that a different way again? Is it a bit easier because the shell's almost hard?
Yeah, I'm not really up to speed with it. My friend Ron Cook from Hobart, he specialises in crabs and crayfish, and he does an absolutely beautiful job of them. I don't reckon you could probably get a better job anywhere. But I haven't dabbled in them, so I'm sort of not up to speed with the process that Ron does. A lot of the taxidermists sort of keep, especially with things like crabs and that, they keep their methods pretty hush hush, if you know what I mean. For obvious reasons, they don't want competition around the area, and it's fair enough because there's not, there's probably it's not a real big place, Tasmania, so you don't really want too much competition down here. But I sort of started taxidermy in the Launceston Museum, the Queen Victoria Museum in Launceston, and I worked there for a little while, and they taught me how to do fish and birds, and I sort of did some kookaburras and stuff, and I sort of love fishing, so I sort of ended up getting into the fish and doing it as a hobby just to start with, and it just grew and grew and grew over 25 years. Now I'm full time doing it full time. So
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, it's good to be able to do your passion for what you to make an income. Do you find it's impacted your fishing though? Or do you find you're out there catching things and you're comparing to some of your customers, the fish they've got and going, oh, geez, I need to get a bigger fish here because
yeah,
these guys have put me to shame?
absolutely, especially with the trout. Like, I'm pretty lucky. I've seen some of the biggest trout that a lot of people in Australia, that have never seen, and it makes you think. My personal biggest trout's about 9 pounds, and seeing a fish nearly 40 pounds, well, it sort of it makes your little 9 pounder look like a little guppy compared to that. So, but it raises me up. Like this time of year, especially when Tasmania's trout season opens, I get a really big rush of fish coming in from Lake Crescent, which is in the middle of Tasmania. And there's some trophy fish in there, and also a lot of the estuaries. I get a lot of fish from the estuaries, the sea running fish, and they grow really big because they're eating like high protein food like white bait and little eels and a lot of little native fish we get in the rivers here, and they can grow absolutely huge. And probably 90% of my work comes from sea trout, from those big sea trout.
So that was going to be my question about the 39 pounder. Where what is that? That's a big fish. Like for that to get that big, it's obviously towards it's more a sea trout. Is that what you're saying?
No, that's
Wow.
it's a what happens here is normally we get these monster trout in two areas, and it can happen in the wild, but normally if it happens in the wild and they get to 20 pounds, it has to be somewhere with a real lot of food. And normally these days where it happens is in the estuaries where the trout are catching fish to eat, or behind the back of fish farms. And what happens, the trout don't necessarily come from the farm. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they get out when they're little. Sometimes they get out when they're a bit older. Sometimes they're wild fish in the river. And what happens is the the outflow of the fish farm, a lot of the food that gets fed to the trout in it, the uneaten food like pellets, and also little rainbow trout fry, and even when they get a bit bigger, they'll actually eat whole trout, like whole small rainbows. And a lot of them get out of the trout farm. And what happens is the big wild fish, and some not so wild, some that have actually escaped, will hang around the back of the fish farm and grow absolutely gigantic. And that's what's happened in this case. It's been a fish that's either come out of the fish farm at a small size or a bigger size, and it's got even bigger again by feeding on all the rubbish and all the small rainbows and that get out of the fish farm, or it's a wild fish in the river, and it's tapped onto that food source coming out of the back of the fish farm, because most of the fish farms are actually built on rivers in Tasmania. And the river that fish farm is built on is called the Taina River, just out of Hobart. And it happens in a few other spots. There's another fish farm in Brumbies Creek, and which is in the north of the state. And these huge brown trout, they don't even farm brown trout in the fish farm, but these huge brown trout live behind the fish farm and eat all the fry and the juvenile rainbows and that, the fingerlings that come out of the pipes that run through Brumbies Creek fish farm, and they sit there and they just grow gigantic. And every now and then you hear of a 20-pound fish or, 15-pound fish getting caught behind those fish farms. So it's a bit like what happens in New Zealand, like at Twizzle, the river over the canals over there. There, all those big fish apparently grow huge because they're eating a lot of the fish food that's coming out of the farms, and there's a lot of farms in those canals over there. So it's an artificial source of protein for the fish, and that's why they grow so big.
So essentially, it's like an all-you-can-eat buffet that
Yep.
they're just sitting off the back of and just having a field day as all that food source just keeps popping along, and they're just able to grow ginormous like a couple of the things I've seen on your page. That's look, either way, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a fish that's out there to be caught. It's impressive nonetheless. I would not be upset if mine was an escaped farm fish was that big. I'd be just as happy.
Oh, my word. Excuse my cold too, mate. I've got a bit of a croaky voice and I'm losing it. So,
You're right.
yes. Well, at the end of the day, mate, you look at it, trout are an introduced species. They're not native to Tasmania or the mainland. And, 90% of the lakes and rivers around Tasmania, the fish have actually been stocked. So they've come out of fish farms anyhow at the end of the day. The only ones that probably haven't, a few little rivers around the place have little wild populations of browns, and the sea trout obviously are self-populating. But really, it's all artificial. The whole fishery is artificial from the start. So whether the fishes come out of Eildon Pondage in Victoria or up at Arthur's Lake, up the Central Highlands, yes, it's a wild trout, but originally, many, many, many moons ago, came out of a fish farm. So, a trout's a trout at the end of the day.
Yeah, and it's always fascinated me a little bit. Like, I tend to talk about deer and a few different species, but the trout side of things, where we have a non-native fish that we deliberately breed and stock for people to catch, sort of goes against what a lot of conservation groups want to do with like deer, having them not on the landscape. But then we've got trout that we breed like crazy and put back into the rivers and streams and whatnot for people to catch. It's very interesting, the different dynamics from sort of my perspective. With the taxidermy you do, is there any times when people, like you said, they freeze a fish, but is there any times that they might not get it right or something goes wrong? And is there another way of being able to provide a trophy for them?
Yes, there is, mate. Trout, you can cast, fiberglass cast trout. They do, I've done them, but it's quite I've got moulds of trout in my shed, which I can make up for someone. I do the snapper the same way. I actually make a mould and I attach all the real fins onto the snapper. It just makes it look a bit more lifelike. And but with the trout, they don't. Once frozen and they come out of the freezer, probably about 8 out of 10 don't cast that well, because what happens is they deteriorate very, very quickly once they come out of the freezer, and they actually go lumpy, and you're forever losing scale detail on the mold, because you have to do a lot of repair work to try and get them smooth again. So what they do in America, and it's an absolute huge job, and I won't do it because it's just such a massive job. They actually skin mount the fish, and then they take a mold of the skin mount, and that way it won't actually, it won't go bumpy and horrible once it's frozen. But it'd have to be a pretty special fish to do that. You'd have to, because it's such a big process. You got to do basically two jobs to get a mold of a fish, and so I won't do them anymore because of that reason. But other fish do cast really well, like snapper, kingfish, tuna, marlin, brim, any of those sort of fish. You can make a really nice either fiberglass or silicon mold of the fish, and fill like do two sides, so it's like a sandwich, and then fill it with gel coat and resin and matting, and clamp it together, and you've got an exact master of the fish. So it's exactly the same shape as what your fish was. There's no artistic license at all in carving the body or anything like that. It's identical to the millimetre. So it's the most accurate way to do the fish, but they're probably harder to get the realism of a skin mount, because the skin mount's always got better scale definition, because the undercuts in the mould are never ever as sharp as what the scales are on the actual real skin. And, around the gills and places like that, it picks it up nicely. Like silicon's probably the best of it, silicon rubber. It picks up the detail really nice, but it's never ever going to be as real looking and as sharp as what a real fish head would be. So it has its ways. The one thing, beauty of it, you can do multiple copies of the fish. So if someone caught a snapper, a 90 centimetre snapper, and wanted to eat it or wanted to release it, they could, and they could come to me and say, I'll let my fish go, or I've eaten it. Have you got a mould of a 90 centimetre snapper? And I'd say, yes, I have. I've got one. And I'd be able to do them up one. I've got quite a few moulds at home of snapper, especially both males and females, from about a metre down to about 80 centimetres. So I could nearly match up the fish to the person's what they caught. But trout, it's a bit of a process with trout doing it that way to do it properly. So I just don't do it anymore. All my trout are just skin mount.
Okay, so you're a keen fisher. What do you like to chase the most?
Snapper.
Snapper, okay.
Yep.
I would have thought with the a lot of trout down there, that would be like right up there. Why snapper?
I grew up in the Tamar Valley, which is just out of Launceston, and it's on the shores of the Tamar River. And when I'm 50 now, and when I was about in my mid-20s, I caught a snapper, and there wasn't a lot of people fishing for them back then, and I got nearly addicted to them because they were just such a glorious looking fish, and I sort of had the whole river to myself back then. It was really good because there was only people chasing flathead. People didn't chase snapper and Tassie back in the 90s. They were more after bread and butter fish. And there wasn't a lot of snapper in Tasmania back then. They've only really become thick the last probably 10 years. And like I used to fish really quite hard I used to catch between 4 and 10 fish a season, but out of those 4 and 10 fish, normally 2 or 3 of them were over 20 pounds. And I just got that addicted to them. Like I was fishing 3 and 4 times a week, and I just got really addicted to it. And I started fishing down at Bridport while I was living there too, and I caught some really lovely fish down here. And I just love the whole process, going out, catching the squid. I use fresh squid a lot of the time, and then turning that fresh squid back into a nice big red. And I've been lucky. I've had some of the best Victorian anglers come over and come fishing with me in the tamer when I was younger, because they all wanted to catch the tamer river snapper. People like Jeff Wilson, who does Jeff Wilson's knots and rigs, and I've had quite a few famous people come over and fish with me and try and catch the elusive Tamer River snapper. So it's been a really good experience, the whole thing with snapper fishing.
Yeah, that's cool. I think that, my old man used to target snapper a lot,
Yeah,
and down the south coast of New South Wales, around the Ulladulla sort of region, and they are a beautiful fish.
yeah,
And I can understand why people get addicted to fishing, and it's like any of the outdoor sort of pursuits. And I really struggle to limit myself to one, because whether it be hiking, camping, fishing, spearfishing, hunting, they all offer something just unique. But there's nothing, I love a sunrise out on the water,
yeah,
and it's just magical. And then when you see, when the ocean's alive and there's bait fish and seals and dolphins and sharks and birds, and you just feel like you're in like a Nat Geo sort of film.
yeah,
It's amazing. And to then be able to catch decent fish to feed the family, that's awesome. I'm all about trying to catch whatever it is to use and feed the family,
yeah,
because
absolutely.
it's great, and it links us back to our ancestors and where we came from, and that's a big thing for me. When you get a snapper,
Yep.
if you're going to turn it into a mold, do you eat it?
No.
Because you're freezing it and then using it. That's what it's more of a process that you're not getting to use the meat as well.
Yes.
Okay.
The only way you could do it is, and I don't normally do them this way because they just don't look as real. Is I'm sure everyone's seen in the, especially 20, 30 years ago in a lot of tackle shops, there was always a half-sided mount of a snapper up on the wall. And doing it that way is quite a simple, easy way of making a mount, but it also allows the angler to take the fillet off the other side. So that's the only way you can really eat the fish, because what happens is you have to completely defrost the fish, because it has to be at room temperature or warmer for the fiberglass to set on it. And by the time you've done both sides, which normally takes, I normally leave it overnight. Like I'll do one side and then I'll flip it over the next morning and I'll do the other side in the morning. And the fiberglass fumes going through the fish at the same time, and the fiberglass consolidating and heating up, it actually probably cooks the fish a bit as well. Yeah, when you get it out of the mold the next morning, it's pretty well, you just the fumes going through it and that. I'd never eat one. It'd be not good for you, I don't reckon.
Yeah, fair enough. Mate, squid jigging. I'm guessing that's how you do it. I love it. It's
Yeah,
just off the rocks with the little prawn jig.
yeah,
And man, it is
awesome.
so much fun.
Yeah,
Except getting squirted with ink. That's not so great sometimes.
yeah.
And that's happened once or twice, but it is, geez, it's good. Do you obviously eat it as well? Like, do you turn it all just for the snap of bait, or do
Oh,
you
if
pinch
there's
some yourself?
if there's really big fish around, I won't eat it. But
That's some self restraint there,
yeah,
because there's nothing better than a bit of calamari.
if I've yeah, no, mate, it's beautiful. I love it. That's what I mean. The snapper fishing, it's just such a process. Like, normally we go out. I've only got a little tinny. I fish out of a 4.1 metre centre console, and I mainly shallow water fish for snapper. So, I'm probably rarely in over 15 metres, and of a night, I fish a lot of a night, and I'll be in probably 3 or 4 metres sometimes of a night. And
Yeah, wow. That shocks me.
yeah, I've caught a lot of my really big fish have been in crazy shallow water. Because what happens is they come in, especially in the tamer, and even so down here at Bridport, they come in the shallows, and they eat the crabs around the shores. And all those little crabs we get, they're always in that intertidal zone between. See, we get 3 metre tides here, so they'll normally be in sort of 2 metres to 5 metres, and they're always on a mud bottom. And the snapper coming after dark in the Tamar River, and they'll always be full of crabs the next morning if you catch one early in the morning. And even toadfish, they love toadfish. When the water warms up after Christmas, they get on the little toadfish here, and a lot of the really big fish you'll catch early hours of the morning have always got full of little toads. They must have some way of processing the poison in the toadfish, because it doesn't seem to affect them. And I've had gummy sharks do the same thing. They'll eat toads, and you'll clean them the next day and there'll be toadfish in their stomach, and it doesn't hurt them though. So it'd probably kill us though, I reckon.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't want to chance the old toadfish personally. But
Either.
look, it just takes me back a bit that you're getting to get out into a river in a tinny and catch some decent snapper.
Yeah.
Like for us, or for my experience anyway, it's more deep sea.
Yep.
Chasing snapper. Like they do come in. I know I used to fish a lake down the south coast, and we used to occasionally get the small ones in there. Not as much as brim and things like that, but you'd get the odd one.
Yeah.
It just, that sort of took me back that you're sitting on sort of 15 meters and catching snapper. That's awesome.
Yeah, overnight. Like I've caught them in 2 metres of a night on a low tide change in the Tamar.
Yeah.
And these are fish over 20 pounds. And they'll come up and feed around the edges in hardly any water, and you just wouldn't even know they were there. And there's no structure there. They're all on mud, and they're just out in the middle of a big mud flat, or on the edge of a channel, just about to go onto a big mud flat, waiting for the tide because of the big tides we get here. It's really pretty unique fishing. It's a bit similar to Western Port and Victoria. They get the big tides there, and it runs pretty hard, and the fish do a similar thing there.
It's that local knowledge fishing sometimes, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
I'm relatively confident in the areas that I know when I'm chasing stuff, but going somewhere different, it's a different kettle of fish. I know my old man moved up to Queensland, and he's in a beautiful spot up there opposite Gary or Fraser Island. And it took him a couple of years to really dial in spots and be able to know where to go and what to do. So I can understand the allure of chasing those bigger fish, but also that how hard you have to work just to get that understanding of the times and the right bait and how they're moving. It is such an art form. It's not as simple. Like, I mean, always someone's going to go out and just throw a line in and get lucky, but to do it regularly is just a different kettle of fish, isn't it?
Yeah.
No pun intended.
Absolutely, mate. It's I've got friends in Victoria who used to fish the Barwon River, and the Barwon was a prime spot for big mulloway. And a lot of those people have actually come over here and fished with me for the Tamar snapper back in the early 2000s and the 90s. And because the fish were so light on the ground, we were spending similar hours in the Tamar targeting these big snappers, what they were doing their mulloway over there. And, sometimes I'd get 100 hours racked up for one fish. But, normally they were really good fish. Like they were, as I said, between 8 and 11 kilos. So back then it was, a young man. I probably wouldn't do it that hard now, but a young man, that obsessed with it all. I used to love it. I know those guys in New South Wales and Victoria and South Australia, they all do the same thing for their mulloway. And yeah, it's just it's a real art, and you've got to take your hat off to the people who do it, because it's not easy. And, staying up all night and catching your bait the day before and making sure the bait's fresh or alive, and then fishing under the moon all night. It's a real art form.
It's funny. I sometimes say hunting and shooting is an expensive hobby, but then you start to throw in a boat, and then there's so many other elements to that side of it. And my brother and best mate, they just went out up off. Don't quote me, but I think it was off Rockhampton, and they did like an 8-day charter. And some of the fish they got was just sensational. I'll get them on eventually to talk about it, but they were getting wahoo and tuna and you name it, and they both did that. And then they also jumped in with the spears and shot a couple of things too. So it was a pretty damn good trip, and I'm pretty happy at the moment because I was lucky enough that the brother brought back, and he probably gifted us, at least probably 10 kilos worth of fish, which is just sensational. And just a mix of just, coral, trout, you name it. They had such a plethora of different species. Yeah. It was dead set sensational. So I was sitting there going, oh, geez, I didn't even have to go out. And that was like a 24-hour boat ride. And I'm terrible. So Tasmania's, perking my ears up here in the river because I get really seasick, like terribly seasick to the point that it does impact me going out because I don't want to feel that way. And
no, it's horrible.
It's when you were talking about the size of the snapper in the river, I'm like, yeah, that sounds really good. And I'm down there next year actually for a wedding. So I was like, yeah, maybe I'll have to do a bit of planning now and get out there and try and nail a snapper down there.
Oh, mate. Well, times have changed. Like now they're just that because they're emerging species in Tasmania. And they're a bit like our King George whiting now. They've just exploded, and they're a common fish now. And we're not just catching those big fish. It's a real mixed sizes. We get little pinkies, and I think you call them squire, and all the way up to fish sort of 8 and 9 kilos still. So we've got a really good fishery now, and the whiting, like the King George whiting, are the same. Back then in the 90s, you'd only hear of one now and then, but now they're our main sport fish. They're just that thick, and people are catching them all the time, all year round. So it's just great to see.
How did that come about?
Well, some people think it's global warming. I've got no idea, to be honest. I've been pretty lucky, actually. I work with a scientist at IMAS, which is it's like our research fisheries down here, and they've done research on the snapper and the whiting, and my job was actually to write down data for one of the scientists on the ages of the snapper, and they did a few tests on the snapper. They weighed the gonads and cut the ear bones out, measured the fish. This is all from the frame of the snapper, and people were donating their frames, and they found out a bit about them. They're about the same age as Victorian fish, but they found out that they're actually not Victoria's stock. So they've actually been here, but they've just increased. They've bred up over the years, so they've come from our own stock of fish. So they're not fish moving down from the mainland. They're actually Tassie fish. So they're those big fish I was catching back then in the 90s. They're all related to those fish. So it looks like we've always had snapper here, but just not in large numbers.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I would have thought migration would have been one of the key areas, but that's cool to know, isn't it?
They can tell because the ear bones or the otoliths that they cut out of the fish's skull in Port Phillip Bay and other areas, they get a DNA signature in the ear bone. I'm pretty sure it's called barium, the chemical gets in it. And they've tested the fish that I was catching down here in the 90s and also at Bridport here as well, and it didn't match anything they had on file anywhere in Australia. So it must be that because every spot's different, like they can tell the fish from Western Port from the fish from Port Phillip. A lot of the fish get a chemical in the ear bone that what how they tell is the water that's coming out of the Yarra River actually affects the ear bone, and they can, under the microscopes and that, they can actually see where the fish is from. So they're our fish, so they haven't migrated, or not recently. Put it that way, they've been here for quite some time.
Yeah, that's cool. It's good stuff. Like that fascinates me when you're finding out stuff like this, and just sort of it's just a little bit of a puzzle and a bit of, I guess, mystery to the whole thing that they were there, but why have the numbers exploded and they're a bit more prolific in being able to catch them and have them around. And what has led to that? It's always a fascinating thing to try and understand the patterns and what's happening. So yeah, that's cool. It's and being involved it must be pretty cool too, that you've been able to add to trying to work out what's happening.
Yeah, I was pretty lucky because I was their main frame donator because I used to catch so many. I still catch a lot, and I donate most of my frames I eat. And I got to know the scientists quite well because they were always calling in my place and picking up frames from me, and they even gave me my own freezer from from IMAS. They put a freezer up in my shed because I used to fill it up that regularly. But yeah, I got to know them quite well, and they asked me last year if I'd like to come in and help them process the fish. So I thought, oh well, something a bit different from cutting fish open all the time. So and doing some artwork on them. So I'll go in and help them do some work on them. So I went in and did that. So it was really good.
So speaking of cutting fish open, have you ever cut something open and gone, what the hell?
Oh yeah.
It just shocked you. What was one of those things?
Well, I've cut trout open, and some of the things that big trout eat is it's just crazy. Like, you really wouldn't want a trout to grow to 100 pounds because honestly, they'd eat humans. They'd be more dangerous than a shark, I reckon. I've had them eat trout over half the size of the actual trout that's in it.
Yeah,
That
wow.
that the fish is. So I've had them eat big redfin, like huge redfin. A lot of eels, always eels in them, like the real big ones. They love eels. Lamprey, which I don't know if you're familiar with them, are you?
No, I'm not. What are they?
No, what they are is they're like an eel with a little suction cup on their mouth, and we get them down here. And a lot of them, they're along the north coast here, but they get more of them on the west coast. And they're a bit like an eel. They come into the inshore rivers at a certain time of the year, and the big sea trout come in feeding on them. They're really ugly looking thing. You'll have to Google it and check them out when you get sick. Yeah, but all sorts of things, really, like snapper. I've had a snapper with jaffas in its guts. So someone was throwing jaffas over the side of the boat at Christmas time, and
Yeah.
he caught a 7 kilo snapper. And when I finished mounting it, I cut it open and it had jaffas in it. That was back in. I don't even know if you can get jaffas anymore, but they're chocolates anyhow. Anyone that doesn't know. What else? I've had a lot of leather jackets. They love leather jackets. Big snapper.
Don't we all?
Yeah,
Geez, they're a beautiful, sweet fish, the old leather jacket.
yeah. They seem to eat anything that's slow moving down here. So normally, flathead, anything that can't swim that fast, like they're not going to chase down a mackerel or something like that. Not the fish down here. I don't know about up in New South Wales, but the fish here more tend to feed on the slow moving things along the bottom, and very rarely will we find bait fish in them. Occasionally little pinkies might have bait fish in them, but not big fish. They're always got either crabs, crayfish. Sometimes big crabs. I'll crush them up, like smash them all up and eat them. Sometimes scallops. A lot of scallops in them where I live down at Bridport. There's a lot of scallop beds out in front of the town here. But yeah, a real wide variety of food. Like they'll have a go at more, as you probably know, they have a go at just about anything if it's if it's reasonably fresh, and and lures too. Like they take soft plastics as well. So
yeah, that's pretty interesting. That they do like to chase a lot of different things. So I'm still a little bit taken aback that you're catching them in such low levels of water. That's cool. That's super cool.
It's just crazy. Like, especially like my years in the tamer of fishing. I used to curl up in my little dinghy. I was only in a 3.7 metre dinghy in the tamer, and I used to put a bean bag in between the two seats and an outdoor sleeping bag, and I'd sleep in that. And I'd leave my rods out when I'd go. I'd have a snooze, normally between the tide changes, and every now and then I'd get one, pick it up while I was fast asleep, and oh man, because I use overhead reels for them. I use Abu Ambassadors, and anyone that knows what the ratchet sounds like an Abu Ambassador, and a 20-pound snapper going crazy in 2 or 3 meters of water, it's just unbelievable.
Nice wake up call.
It's a nice wake up call. Makes you jump out of bed pretty quick. I'll tell you now. It's awesome.
Mate, look, that all sounds awesome. I'm glad we've had a chat because it's got me super excited for the upcoming season in summer. I love to get on the water, and it's just one of those things. So I really appreciate your time and talking us through what you do down there. So where can people find your work and follow you and have a look at your stuff?
Yeah, Matt. At the moment, I haven't got a website, but I'm on Facebook under Tasmanian Fishing Artistry, and also on Instagram as well, and also do a little bit of writing for Spooled magazine in New South Wales. So they normally promote my taxidermy pretty well too. So it's a online fishing magazine that Shane Mentsworth in South Australia runs. So great magazine.
Yeah, cool. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
Just before we go, do you have people from all over sending you fish to do, or is it just mainly Tasmania?
No, I've had fish from all over Australia. I've had trout from Western Australia. I've had a lot of people on holidays here especially up the Central Highlands and that, catching their first trout and leaving it here with me, and I'd pack it up and send it back to places around Australia. Done quite a few snapper for people in Victoria. When their taxidermists over there have been a bit busy or whatever, they've sent fish over to me, and I've completed them and sent them back over there. So yeah, like I get work from mainly Tasmanian. Trout is the main thing I do, but every now and then I get a job from interstate. So yeah, don't hesitate. If your local taxidermy is busy, always try me, but normally I'm busy too. So we're all pretty busy people, taxidermists.
It seems to be that way for everyone I talk to. So it's quite a lengthy turnaround. So it's a good thing. Business is going well. You got to be happy about that.
Yeah, no, it is. It's a good industry. Like, I enjoyed it. It was just a hobby when I started, and I sort of, because I come from the tackle industry. When I was younger, I worked at Complete Angler for in Launceston for quite a few years, and then I bought my own tackle shop and ran that for 10 years until the internet sort of finished that up. But yeah, so I've just gone a different way with the taxidermy now. So I'm doing it full time now. So it's really good.
Good to hear. Fantastic that business is booming. And what I'll do is I'll put a link in the show notes to the Instagram and Facebook pages for everyone, to make it easy for everyone to jump over to and check out what you do. So Damon, mate, really appreciate your time tonight. Thanks for jumping on and having a chat. And mate, keep doing it. I love what you're doing, and I can't wait to see more of it, because it's definitely some impressive work that you do down there.
Thanks, Matt. Lovely to have a chat with you, mate.
Appreciate it. All right, listeners, bye for now. If you have a topic, guest, question, or any gear that you want to hear about on the podcast, shoot us an email. AustralianHuntingAndBeyond@gmail.com. Alternatively, find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All the links are in the show notes. If you haven't already, Make sure you give us a review and subscribe to our podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.